Yep, welcome back to Shuaige the podcast. This is episode 14, and we finally got Niall in.
You have?
After a bit of miscommunication going both ways, we finally got Niall in today, which I'm very happy about. And this man has wrote about everything. He's been in boxing news mags, and that's your main sport, isn't it, Niall?
It is, yeah. Boxing became my main sport. It wasn't when I started, no. When I started, it was football like everybody else, but it became boxing.
Yeah. You started in... did you start in London?
No, I'll give you the full breakdown, shall I?
Yes.
I went to university, and while I was at university, I decided I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps and my grandfather's, who were both sports journalists. And my granddad, who I remember towards the end of his career, was a sports journalist in Wolverhampton and then in Lincolnshire. And my dad was the sports editor in Birmingham for 30 odd years.
Oh, wow.
So while I was at university, I realised that I wasn't going to be anywhere near good enough to become a professional footballer. And so I did have aspirations when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So at university, I looked around and thought, what do I know about? And I didn't know about anything. I was doing a politics degree, which I enjoyed. But I just kind of fell into it. I remember ringing my dad one day and saying, what do I do to be a journalist? And he said, well, you write to them. So I wrote to 92 newspapers.
Wow.
And I got about handwritten letters, and I got about 20 odd replies, I suppose, something like that. And I got 2 offers, one from Peterborough and one from Brighton.
Was this the 80s?
This would have been 1988. And so it was tough to get into the industry even then, and I took the job in Brighton, which involved me starting in Brighton in 1989 on the Brighton Evening Argus. So I started there, but I started actually as a news reporter. I wasn't a sports reporter at all, although I did some sports reporting for the sports editor. But I did everything. I did like music reviews, I did news, I covered pure news, murders, crime, politics. I did everything basically.
Yeah.
And then, Mikey, I moved up to London a couple of years later to the South London Press.
It seemed a bit more hands-on back then. You can kind of dig into anything, and people will do anything to get any sort of news.
But it was a different industry in some ways, because there wasn't clickbait.
No,
you were allowed a lot of time to develop stories, which was important. But like with everything, it was a learning process, and I learnt over the years shortcuts and what have you to getting stories, and how to waste time and how not to waste time, and and it was very, very enjoyable. I mean, I loved being a journalist. I really did. I loved being a news reporter, which I was for 5 or 6 years before I became a sports guy. So I genuinely can say I really loved every minute of it. But it was the result. I mean, on my paper, the South London Press, there would have been at least sort of 20 journalists. Now, my guess is now there'd probably be 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And their job now is just to spew out press releases. My job was to get stories, which was great. I loved every minute of it, really. I honestly say I didn't. I mean, I'd have done it for free if I'd have had the wherewithal. It was that enjoyable.
That's good, as long as you enjoyed it, because nothing worse than getting out of bed in the morning for a job you don't like.
Well, I mean, this sounds a bit philosophical, and I'll try not to be, but I had quite a few friends from university who did well-paid jobs but hated them. Accountants, bankers, that kind of stuff. And they hated their jobs. I knew they hated them. They knew they hated them. And they'd always say to me, oh, no, what are you doing this weekend? And Now, I was skint, but I was happy. So I was kind of, the complete opposite of what most of my pals went into from university. I loved every minute of it. But it wasn't well paid, and it was tough, and the hours were very, very long. But again, it's a vocation. Journalism is you kind of fall in love with it, and I did, just as my dad did. And
it's a similar environment in uni, with everyone in other courses wanting to know what we're doing if we're at games and stuff.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
It's a job that you've really got to be in love with, though, because as I say, the hours are very long, Alex, and the pay's not particularly good when you start. The pay in my career got better and better. Obviously, the further down the line I got, because I ended up working at Sky and at the Nationals, on the Mail and the Express. So the pay got better. But to start off with, it was really tough. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day. I mean, when I started in Brighton, I was on £5,200 a year, which equates to exactly £100 a week. And for that, I had to find my lodgings, my boardings, food, transport, run a car. I mean, I was just absolutely skint, and but it didn't do me any harm. It was the school of hard knocks, and it was great fun, as I say. But I can always remember being a bit broke and not having enough money for my round and stuff. I do remember that. It wasn't easy, but as I say, I loved it.
Do you feel like a lot of people like yourself go into football and then end up working in other sports, maybe because of all the competition in football? And
that does happen.
The amount of people in it.
I mean, most football writers, actually, that I met over the years, love doing other sports as well, because it kind of gets away from football a little bit, and I did. I mean, my knowledge was in football because I played it at a decent-ish standard, so my knowledge was there, whereas I didn't have any boxing knowledge because I never did it.
Right.
But I mean, a lot of football writers do gravitate towards other things because they want to. I mean, Henry Winter, for instance, during the Olympics in 2012, did the yachting down in Weymouth because he just wanted something not to do with football. I did the boxing, and a lot of us did that kind of stuff, and we've all got. We're not just interested in football, and I wasn't. So it kind of developed from there, really. But football was the one that gripped me first because, again, it was lower league stuff. It was Barnet and Leyton Orient and Dagenham and Redbridge and stuff like that. And but again, I loved it. I just loved going to matches and covering them. And I remember being invited into the Barnet boardroom at the end of the game by the then chairman and thinking, I've made it. I'm in the Barnet boardroom. I've made it. I'm in the big time. Obviously, it was nothing like that, but it felt like it at the time. Mm-hmm. I was dealing with professional footballers and just having a great time.
It was the Eubank Benn that were your first boxing match, wasn't it?
Almost. I did a piece on this for Boxing News just recently. It wasn't my first one. My first one was a Robert McCracken fight at York Hall, and I'd known about McCracken. I'd watched him. And I went there. He fought a guy called Ernest Loveridge, I think it was. Yeah, it was. And Rob was brilliant. I remember interviewing Rob after the fight in the ring at York Hall and thinking, oh my God, this guy's actually just Niall Hickman, Boxing News, and he was like, oh yeah, fine. And the idea that I could interview people about their sport was still sort of a bit bizarre, a bit surreal. But I loved it, and then shortly afterwards I went to Benn Eubank.
Yeah.
Harry Mullen offered me, the then editor of the Boxing News, just rang up one day. I don't know why. To this day, it's been lost in the annals of history, but he rang me up and just said, there's a spare ticket going. And I went, oh yeah. So I went to that fight. I didn't really do any journalism there, I can honestly say, because Harry was there and Claude Abrams was there, who became Boxing News editor. And I can't remember doing any work there, but I do remember being there and going, oh my God, I'm at the biggest event of the year, and it was bizarre. It was a kind of weird world that I was living in, and then I was going back to my flat and not being able to afford a loaf of bread. So it was kind of very strange, but at the same time, it was so enjoyable.
Yeah. That's amazing. Rob McCracken's the one who's training AJ at the moment, isn't it?
Well, he was.
AJ,
Joshua, when he lost, decided he had to get rid of his trainer, which is usually what happens with boxing. But Rob and I spoke to Rob only the other day. Go back a long, long way. I mean, he was still fighting in the 90s, and so it was. Yeah, we go back a long, long way. But his was the first one. I can't remember a previous fight. I remember going to one of the dinner shows at, I think it was the Dorchester, to cover a Walsall boxer called Elvis Parsley. Not Presley, Parsley. Elvis Parsley. I remember him as well. That would have been in the very early days as well. But again, a bit like with football, I was still kind of pinching myself that I was interviewing these people.
Yeah.
And going, oh my God, I'm allowed to interview them. And actually, when I was asking them questions as well, they obviously thought I knew a lot about it. I knew nothing about boxing. I knew, when I started, I literally knew nothing.
Yeah.
I'd watched it on the telly with Harry Carpenter and Reg Guttridge, and like everybody, I loved watching boxing, but I didn't know anything about it. Some would argue I still don't.
Who were the first person? Obviously, you're saying you're pinching yourself with, Rob. Who were the first person where you were like, have I just interviewed that guy?
Oh, God, yeah, well, that's a good question, that is, Mikey. I mean, there wasn't really one where I went, oh, my God, I've hit the big time. I mean, I suppose with boxing, I very soon got to know all the main names, Lennox and Nazim and Nigel Benn. I suppose going to Tyson Holyfield, and sitting down with Mike Tyson, that was a bit
surreal,
strange,
yeah.
Bit surreal, because I was like, oh my, this guy's as famous as you can get in sport. But I maybe because my background was in journalism, I was never particularly overawed by interviewing people. I mean, that wasn't something that made me nervous. The more famous they were, no, that didn't really bother me. I mean, because of my dad's job, I'd known famous people all my life. Yeah. So, and he had, and so I wasn't really fazed by that. But, I mean, genuinely, I would say this about to students as well. What you do is, I practiced on the Barnet players, and the late Norient players and stuff. And then I kind of developed, my confidence in that. Yeah. And once you've done that, once you start to develop your confidence and you realise that this person opposite you is not going to jump down your throat and call you an idiot, it kind of gives you a bit of confidence, and that's how it kind of transpired, I suppose. Yeah.
And I guess it's only really the egotistical ones that you're going to have a problem with anyway.
Very few egotistical people in the high octane level of sport. The highest level of sport, very few. They are. As a general rule, they are very not introverted, very, very self-governed. They don't really see the bigger picture. Most sportsmen and women that I've dealt with at the very highest level, they're not ones for thinking of other people's issues and problems and what have you. That's not on their agenda. And that's because of the people that they are. They're generally speaking fairly self-obsessed because they've got to be.
Because of that, yeah.
They've almost got to be. In order to have made it to the top in their chosen sport, they've had to make a lot of sacrifices and a lot of this, that and the other along the way. And so that makes them a very insular, I think, very sort of tunnel vision people. And I haven't met many egos. And I mean, Chris Eubank aside, I've not met many. But then Chris Eubank, I would argue, he's different. But I would argue he's one of the nicest people I've ever met in sport.
My dad loves him.
Well, he's a lovely guy because I've been fortunate enough to meet him outside the ring. And he's one of the very, very few sportsmen who actually rang me up after an event and said, thank you very much. One of the very few.
So cool.
So Chris is different. He's got an ego the size of whatever. But very, very nice with it. And
I'd
actually,
say he's more proud.
Whatever word you want to use for it. But he's a nutcase in some ways, but very likeable in others. But most of the people I met in the high levels of sport were very, very driven, very. It would be rare that they would be remotely interested in you, or your, whereas lower down maybe but that's what got them to the top.
Yeah,
that absolute determination, drive, whatever you want to call it.
Attitude.
Yeah. So. But no, ego, no, not really. No.
I know you saw. Was it you saw Tyson at his lowest? And what was that like?
Well, he was knocked out by Danny Williams, and then I went to the fight after that, where he was knocked out by some bloke who's basically a pub bouncer. I mean, he was, he's a disaster waiting to happen, wasn't he, Mike? I mean, Mike Tyson is lots of things. But I think he's a product of his environment more than anything else. And his environment, which I've been to his house where he grew up in New York, in Brownsville. Well, it's not a house, it's a flat. And the place is just as bad as you can get. Yeah. And that's what created Mike Tyson. That's why Mike Tyson had all the problems that he had in his life. It's one of the reasons. Throw into that cocktail huge amounts of money coming in from the age of a teenager, plus his main manager died, Jim Jacobs. All the people around him that he kind of lent on in those early years either went or died or whatever. Rooney, Steve Lott, all these people just went out of his life, and he became governed by one person, Don King, and the rest is history, as they say. And Mike Tyson was always going to combust.
What was that room like?
Which one?
His flat.
Oh, his flat, his place. I went inside, and it's. I mean, Brownsville is the worst suburb of the worst part of Brooklyn. So just imagine growing up on those streets.
Yeah.
And it's tiny, it's small, it's decrepit. There's urine, graffiti everywhere. I mean, it's just an awful place for anyone to grow up. Yeah. His father left. He was raised by his mother, who wasn't being very motherly. Yeah, I mean, all the ingredients were there for disaster later in his life, and that's what happened. I'm a bit surprised he's still alive, to be perfectly frank. I think probably he is as well. But when I saw him towards the back end of his career as well, he was just falling apart. I mean, he was broke as well.
Yeah.
This is a man who made $300 million in the ring, was literally skint. So things had just gone horribly wrong. Thankfully now, by what we can see from the outside, he appears to have brought some sort of semblance of normality to his life. Yeah. Thankfully. There was a good documentary with Bruno and Tyson recently, which I was interested in because I knew Frank as well. And it kind of pointed to a more a happier Mike Tyson. But, you know, from what his background was, I can't honestly say I'm surprised what happened to him at all.
No. Yeah, there's a clip of him saying how much, because obviously he did look up to Muhammad Ali, but they all did. But obviously they had a close relationship, didn't they? But in reality, they were so different.
Well, I mean, they're as different as you could possibly get. I mean, you know,
he was
Ali's a middle-class kid who grew up. I mean, Allah ruled his life, didn't it? Islam ruled his whole existence.
Yeah.
They were both serial womanizers, which I think is the only connection between the two. Yeah. But Ali was erudite and could talk to anyone and could laugh and make jokes. Mike Tyson couldn't do any of those things. But like all boxers, I mean, you know, he looked up to Ali, looked up to Larry Holmes, looked up to loads of people. In fact, Tyson's absolute hero wasn't Ali; it was Sonny Liston.
I thought it was Duran.
It was Liston who, and he saw a lot of himself in Sonny Liston. Yeah. And in fairness, that connection between him and Liston was very clear. Yeah. The connection between him and Ali, there isn't any, other than hero worship.
Yeah. No. Is there anyone that you've really got, a fond relationship with, even a friendship with, other people that you've met?
Well, now?
Yeah.
Loads of people. I mean, loads of people in sport and journalism. But having said that, you meet so many people on the journey that keeping in touch with all of them is impossible.
Yeah.
You can't keep in touch with everybody. And unfortunately, through the passage of time, a lot of people that I knew very well, you can't keep in touch with everyone. But they know who they are. There are certain people that I ring up about everything to do with sport, mainly in boxing. But there are footballers still that I ring up and speak to on a regular basis and, chat about this, that and the other. But it's, I mean, you got to... You do get very close to people when you're a journalist, and that can sometimes be difficult. I certainly found it difficult a few times when I got to know, in particular, boxers, because they're in the ring and getting their brains bashed in. It's a tough thing to watch.
You've got to write about it,
and you've got to write about it, and you've also got to criticise as well. Yeah. I mean, I remember when Froch lost to Groves. He didn't lose to Groves. When he lost to Kessler, that was difficult to write about. When Ricky lost to Floyd Mayweather, that was difficult to write about. Yeah. But he can almost get too close, and certainly with Carl, very, very fond memories of him. But it's difficult watching someone that you like, going in a ring.
I always thought it'd be hard for athletes to get, really, really fond relationship with a journalist.
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, a lot of athletes. I mean, a lot of football people and a lot of boxing people, they will regard some of their best mates. would be journalists, because believe it or not, half the job of being a journalist is to be quite diplomatic sometimes, and we are often sounding boards for them. I've had boxing promoters and boxers ring me up. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I'm not in any position to give advice, but they are seeking that. So you give it as best as you can.
Yeah.
I remember one boxer ringing me up and saying, should I retire? And I said, yeah, you should. But you do tend to get an independence of thought from journalists, which you won't get from a lot of people. And I won't name names, but a lot of boxers will be surrounded by people who will not necessarily be there for all the best reasons. Might be trainers, might be their family, might be this, and it might be money. Whereas journalists, we don't have that connection with them. All we do is interview them, so we can give often advice which is a bit closer to maybe what they should be listening to, as opposed to what they are listening to.
What do you think about the Conor Benn situation?
Well, the drugs allegations? Well, they are allegations at the moment, although he failed a test.
Twice, wasn't it?
Twice. Look, the simple rule is this, from my mind: if you fail a drugs test, you should never ever box ever again. And so many fighters are getting away with it at the moment. Virtually all the top 10 heavyweights have failed the drugs test, which means it's not working. Now, it's very, very easy for people to say, it's the BBBC's fault, British Boxing Board of Control, which I don't think it is. I think it's everybody's fault. But I think what we've got to say is either we allow drugs in our sport or we don't. And at the moment, we've got a kind of... it's not just about Conor Benn, it's about everybody. We've got a kind of strange mishmash of the two, whereby we don't and we do, no. Whereas I just think it's got to be dead simple. If you're found with it in your system, and you haven't got a good reason why it's there, that's it. You don't box again. At the moment, the punishments are just ludicrously ineffective. So that's why boxers are getting away with it and doing it. Well, I remember going to an Amir Khan fight in Washington, where he boxed for I think it was the IBF title, against a boxer who subsequently failed a drugs test, and nothing happened afterwards. Nothing. That boxer wasn't banned for any amount of time. He wasn't stripped of the title. Nothing. He failed the drugs test.
Was it Conor?
No, it wasn't. It was before that. But he failed the drugs test, and nothing happened. And until we either decide we get rid of it or we don't. And at the moment, we're in a kind of sort of strange sub-world whereby we're all saying, it shouldn't happen, but when it happens, there isn't any punishment.
It should be black and white, shouldn't it?
It should be, as it is in other sports. As it is, well, of course it does, but as in other sports, they've tried to clean up a lot of other sports because you either accept performance-enhancing drugs or you don't. Now, I don't think we should, and if you don't allow steroids or masking agents or whatever these things are, then that's it. Caught with it, you're gone.
I think especially in a combat sport, he should be really...
I couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. This isn't tiddlywinks, is it?
The power some of these fighters have without the drugs is
frightening, yeah. In some sports, like golf, I suppose you could almost argue, well, what's it going to do? But, I don't know many golfers going around taking steroids, but because it's not needed. But in boxing and in mixed martial arts, this is a contact sport involving power.
Yeah.
And if you're cheating to get extra power, then you're cheating. End of. But we could sit and list the names of people who've been done for drug taking, and it's getting longer every week. And every single time the boxer goes, I ate a pig's hide, or I did that, or I ate the shepherd's pie, and I don't know how it got in there. The usual cobbler's stories. They got in there because they're taking drugs. Simple as that. Well, and I don't know Conor Benn from Adam, to be honest with you, but he was found with something in his system.
Well, Chris Eubank Sr. made the point of it's not just the fighter. Sometimes it might not even be the fighter, but the team behind him.
It can be anyone.
He's not administering. He won't be just administering that himself. It's the team around him. They'll be getting those people for him. They'll be doing it for him.
It can be anyone. It can be parents. It can be trainers. It can be advisors. It can be hangers-on. It can be anyone. But ultimately, the boxer's the one who goes, I'm going to cheat.
I just also agree that him and the team, because the teams are obviously letting him. But then again, how could you prove that?
How could you prove that? Very, very difficult. Yeah, look, I think we've just got to make a decision on it, and that is not blame the BBBC for everything, which is what the promoters tried to do last time, and be simple. Either it's allowed or it's not. And if it's in your system and you haven't got a reason why it's in there, then you're out the game. You're gone. And until we do that, it'll carry on.
It's sad. It's really sad.
Yeah.
Well, it's in every sport, to be honest. I think I don't know what football. A footballer they in on it. I don't.
I know in stuff like cycling where it's massive because the amount of stamina you need to do that.
Yeah.
If you've got anything in you, I think you cut.
Well, they've tried to do that in cycling, haven't they? They've tried to have a literally zero tolerance to it. How successful it's been, I don't know, because I don't know anything about cycling. But I do know in my sport, in boxing, either they decide, we've got to stop this, or they don't. And at the moment, from the outside looking in, I think they're kind of going, well, it shouldn't really happen. But whereas what they should do is either get rid of it and just say, if you're caught with something in your system, you're banned for life. And if that's it, end of. And that will soon make people think, hang on, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Whereas at the moment, they can get away with it.
Well, it's because, especially the ones with amateur pedigree, when they're fighting in the EU, when they're fighting in those European Championships and stuff and Olympics, they can have people bursting through your door at 7 in the morning, 2 in the morning.
Of course they can. Yeah. Well, boxing can do that as well, which is how Conor Benn got caught, of course. But it's really quite simple for me. It really is. Yeah. And as you rightly pointed out, Mikey, this is a contact sport. It relies on power, and if you're cheating to get more power than the next man, then you're cheating, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's not your own natural ability, is it? It's coming out of a vial. So,
what is it that got you into boxing?
The opportunity, really, I suppose. I love my sport. One day, go to York Hall, cover it for Boxing News, and I did. And I just loved it. And then I remember just sort of saying, well, can I do this? Can I do that as well? Yeah. And I fell in love with it very, very quickly, and soon decided this was a sport that I really liked, which I do. There's lots of problems with it, don't get me wrong, in boxing, but you meet lots of good people in it as well. You meet lots of bad people in it, but you meet lots of good. And it's transformed the lives of lots of people for the good. I met Anthony Crolla the other day up in Newcastle, and you couldn't meet a nicer bloke. Yeah. And Anthony I know pretty well, and it's changed his life for the better, which is great. Not all stories are like that, I might add. There are a lot of stories around boxing which are not as end on that kind of fairy tale note. But I kind of just enjoyed it, really. And also, it helped me get close to a lot of footballers, because a lot of footballers love their boxing. Yeah. So I tended to find whenever I went to a boxing show, I'd be getting phone calls from footballers saying, can I get in? Can I do this? Yeah. I took footballers Lee Catamole and Matthew Bates to the first Mike Tyson Fury fight. Oh. And I still remember it now, and I remember going, this kid's going to be good. Didn't think he was going to be as good as he was, but I remember going to that with them, and I did a lot of boxing shows with footballers, which helped, which helped develop my sort of contact space as well.
I know what you mean. There are a lot of bad things about it, and I think there's a lot more bad about it nowadays. I think I've fallen out with it a bit. Obviously I still love it, and I always love it, but it's not. It doesn't always have the special feel to the fights sometimes.
Well, dare I say the obvious, but money has bastardised boxing in some ways. The amateur code and what have you is still something which I think has a great deal of credibility to it. And some of the trainers that you find who give up their time and space for nothing are incredible. But like with everything, money is what has ruined a lot of it for me, because I know what you're saying. And I know that when money gets involved in sport, it can turn very, very nasty very, very quickly. Yeah.
Do you feel like MMA is sort of surpassing boxing now?
I don't know about surpassing, but I think it's coming up on the inside track. Yeah, definitely, Alex. Yeah, I think it's getting there. Certainly with your generation, it's much, much bigger, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive.
And boxing's got to challenge that. It's been challenged. I don't personally like MMA particularly. It doesn't do an awful lot for me, but it does for a lot of other people, so that's fine. But is it getting? Yeah, MMA is getting bigger, and boxing, in a way, is getting smaller. Having said that, boxing still has a heartbeat. You know, when the big fights are on, the country still stops for boxing. But you know, that's whether or not that carries on over the many, many years to come. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, the events of Benn Eubank didn't do the sport any good at all. But I mean, boxing will be here in a guise in 100 years from now. Of course it will. But it used to stop the traffic in this country and in America. And especially in America, it's definitely not as big as it used to be. You know, very few American fighters are well-known personalities. You know, very, very few.
Yeah.
Whereas when it was everywhere, here, there, and everywhere, you know, to be the US champion, you were well known, you were famous. Now, nah. You know, it's only a handful of people nowadays.
I think, well, back then, if you were the champion, you were the champion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was the old days of 8 weight categories and one champion in each.
Now it's everyone's a world champion.
Absolutely.
Nowadays.
Yeah, it has watered it down. That has been a problem, definitely. But boxing's got a whole load of different issues is the reason why. I mean, you don't get it on terrestrial television any longer. That's another reason. So all the bars in New York, I lived in New York for a while, and all the bars used to have the big fight on. Now they don't. But that's boxing again. You know, boxing has worked out that pay-per-view can make vast amounts of money on relatively tiny audiences. Relatively, you know, I mean, Floyd Mayweather was boxing in front of maybe 1 million audiences and making tens of millions of pounds and dollars, but he wasn't being watched by half the nation, which is what Ali and Frazier and all these ones were. Hagler, Hearns, all these guys were being watched by a whole nation. Floyd Mayweather's been watched by a tiny proportion of the population.
But he's making a good buck.
But he's making a lot of money out of it because pay-per-view makes a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, but I forgot what we were going to say. Yeah, I think with the amount of belts there are, I think a lot of these champions are just fighting contenders and they're not fighting each other.
There's 4 main belts, isn't there, for boxing?
Yeah, so think about that. That's
too many.
4 world champions, and most of the time we don't have an undisputed champion. They're all fighting different contenders.
Has AJ got? How many has he got now?
He's got none now.
Oh, has he lost them all?
Yeah, Usyk,
oh right, yeah.
Usyk beat him.
Does Usyk have 3?
No, Usyk has
1, and
okay.
Tyson has 3. But
yeah.
as you rightly point out, you know, there's an alphabet soup of titles and weight categories. I think there's now 36 weight categories in there. I mean, no wonder people don't know who the world champion is because there's so many of them. And I've watched world title bouts which are barely even British level. So, you know, does that make them a world champion if they've got IBF written in front of their name? Yeah. Nah. As you say, Michael, you know, the old days were 8 categories and 1 world champion in each. Which made it very simple to understand.
It seems like you said, because there's only 200,000 people watching this fighter. Like you said, it's £15, £10 pay-per-view.
That's right.
It's a lot of money, and like I said, they're not bothered. They're getting money out of it. So.
Absolutely, yeah. You can make a lot of money out of very small sales in pay-per-view. That's what you can do. And you know, it's made the boxers wealthy, but has it been for the benefit of the sport? Don't think so. I really don't.
No. Is there any sports? What sports do you think have really stuck to their tradition and have stuck to themselves?
Well, quite a few of them have, in fairness. But what I've tended to notice over the years is that some sports go up in popularity and some go down. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, speedway was a massive sport worldwide and in this country. Now it's tiny. Snooker was huge in the 80s. Now it's getting back up there a little bit, but it definitely dipped. So some sport, I mean, cycling was a tiny sport in Britain, and now it's one of the big sports in Britain because we've been successful at it. What you tended to find, though, is that football's obliterated a lot of other sports. Football's a lot bigger now than it ever was. You know, back in the 80s, the most famous sports people in the land were cricketers, boxers, footballers. Now they're footballers. You know, cricketers don't even get a look in, do they, in terms of fame? So that's what's changed. I mean, football has become bigger. It's the great big monolith that's taken over from a lot of other sports, which again I think is a shame. But yeah, some sports are better. I mean, the big sports really are always going to be football, boxing, rugby, cricket. Those the big ones. But then there's other sports which are huge in certain areas. You know, horse racing's massive in certain areas. Basketball's a growing sport in certain areas. You know, in Sheffield, ice hockey's big.
Yeah.
You know, so in certain areas you get rugby league is huge in the north, isn't it? So certain areas you get different sort of sports which are bigger and what have you. But I don't think boxing has looked after itself particularly well. But then at the same time, there's been a whole host of reasons for that, not just one.
Yeah,
we'll wrap it up.
That was Niall Hickman. It was brilliant to have him in. He sorted us out with some brilliant stories, and hopefully he'll be able to sort us out with some good guests as well.
Oh yes.
Yeah, lovely. That was episode 14. We'll be back soon. See you later.
We'll be back.
That's great.